My name's Nina Carter. I'm 32 years old, and right now, I'm standing in the grand marble foyer of my grandmother's estate in Napa Valley, the same estate where every summer the Carter family gathers for what they like to call our annual Legacy Conference. For most people, that name probably sounds kind of noble, like we're all coming together to talk about family values, traditions, maybe even to bond. But trust me, this gathering is less about connection and more about comparison. Everyone's already here, uncles, aunts, cousins. The women shimmer in silk and Chanel. The men flash Rolexes and talk loudly about hedge funds. They arrive in Teslas and Aston Martins, step out in polished loafers, and strut through Grandma's house like they own the air in the room. And then there's me. Simple navy blazer, no brand heels, a pair of gold stud earrings my mom gave me back in college. I parked my 10-year-old Honda between my cousin Damien's matte black Lamborghini and Aunt Val's Escalade. It's a familiar feeling, this sense of being not quite one of them. Not because I'm not blood, I am. Just not the kind they respect. For 10 years now, I've been the one they side-eye over the hors d'oeuvres. The cousin they talk about in whispers, just loud enough for me to hear. She's still renting, right? Did you see what she wore last year? I heard she's consulting or something. What does that even mean? What they don't know, what none of them know, is that I'm not just here for show this time. I've got something in my briefcase that's going to shift the entire balance of power in this family. But before we get into that, where are you watching this from? Drop your city in the comments. Hit that like button. And stay tuned, because today's the day I finally show my family what real wealth looks like, and it's nothing like they think. Let me back up for a second. The Carters have been a name in California real estate since the 1930s. My great-grandfather built the first pieces of what would become a family empire, starting with a couple of post-war housing developments just outside Sacramento. By the time my grandmother Lucille Carter took over in the 1970s, Carter Holdings owned entire blocks of downtown commercial real estate in San Francisco. But Grandma Lucille, she wasn't like the rest of the Carters. She was sharp, yes, calculated. But she believed that wealth wasn't about the flash. It was about freedom. She used to say money talks loudest when it says nothing at all. My dad, her youngest son, inherited that mindset. He fell in love with a public school teacher, my mom, and married her despite the whispers from his older siblings about marrying down. My parents chose a quiet life in Sonoma County. Dad worked as an independent architect designing eco-homes for middle-income families. Mom taught third grade. We lived in a 3-bedroom house with a vegetable garden in the back and a cracked driveway my dad never bothered to fix. Then when I was 15, they were killed in a car accident coming back from a weekend trip. Just like that, my entire world collapsed. Grandma Lucille took me in, even though the rest of the family made it very clear they thought I was becoming the family charity case. I would hear them, at dinners, in hallways. What's she even going to do without them? Lucille's being too soft. She's not one of us, not really. But Grandma, she was my lifeline. In the years I lived with her before college, she taught me everything she knew about money, not just how to spend it, but how to grow it. She showed me how to read market cycles, how to run numbers on a property faster than most agents could open Zillow, and most importantly, how to be patient. She used to say everyone else in this family chases spotlights. You build stage lights. Meanwhile, my cousins, Damien, Serena, Logan, Felicity, and Max were raised in the glitter. Damien got a Porsche for his 16th birthday. Serena's graduation gift was a month in Paris. Logan wouldn't be caught dead in anything not tailored. And me, I was driving the Honda my parents left behind, working part-time in college, and investing every spare dollar I could find. When Grandma passed away during my senior year, she left each grandchild a modest inheritance. My cousins immediately spent theirs down payments, vacations, designer furniture. Logan literally bought a custom billiards table for his condo. I used mine to start building. I lived small, 1-bedroom apartment in Oakland, kept my day job as a freelance analyst, and I started quietly buying property. The stuff no one else wanted. Duplexes on overlooked corners. A run-down fourplex near a college campus. Places you wouldn't brag about on Instagram, but I knew what I was doing. By the time I was 28, I had 15 doors under management, all purchased through anonymous LLCs with the help of Grandma's old lawyer, Mr. Carrington. He'd been around since her first commercial deal in 1972, and he never asked questions he didn't need answers to. Then last year, opportunity knocked. The mid-rise apartment building where Serena and Logan both lived, the owner, an old family friend, was retiring. Wanted a quiet sale. No listing, no fuss. I jumped. Using a web of holding companies Mr. Carrington helped me set up, I bought the building for $26 million. I put nearly everything I had into that deal. Improved the security, repainted the lobby, kept the rent reasonable, but brought it up just a bit closer to market, but still fair. Serena complained about the guest registration system. Logan whined about the construction dust. Neither of them had a clue the person they were complaining about was me. And now we're here. This year's family conference. But this one's different. Because I just found out that Uncle Charles, the self-appointed Carter patriarch ever since Grandpa passed, is planning to propose the sale of Grandma Lucille's estate. The very home we're all gathered in right now. The last real piece of our family's legacy. They want to tear it down and build Carter Lux Residences condos with rooftop pools and smart home tech. But me, I have other plans. And they're all tucked neatly inside this leather briefcase. I pulled into the circular drive Friday afternoon, hoping to get there early, so I could have a quiet moment in the place that meant the world to me before the chaos kicked in. Of course, the Carter fleet had already arrived. Damien's brand new Maserati was basically parked on the front steps like a statement piece. Felicity's gleaming white BMW was tucked beside Uncle Charles's Bentley, and Max's jet black Range Rover took up an obnoxious amount of space like always. And there I was, wedging my dusty Honda in between them like it had wandered into the wrong tax bracket. I stepped out, smoothed my blazer, and took a deep breath. This wasn't just a house. It was home. The 3-story colonial estate had stood here for nearly 80 years, white columns, wraparound porch, and a rose garden that still smelled like Grandma Lucille's favorite perfume. Before I could even ring the bell, Margot, the longtime housekeeper, opened the door. "Nina!" she cried, wrapping me in a hug that smelled like cinnamon and lemon polish. "You look more and more like Miss Lucille every time I see you." "Thanks, Margot." I smiled, the first real smile I'd managed all day. "You're still the best welcome this house has." She lowered her voice and glanced down the hallway. "You should know Mr. Charles has been here all morning. Moved the schedule around. Lots of meetings with the family attorney." Of course, the family attorney. Translation, he's prepping the pitch to sell the house. Margot helped me carry my weekend bag to the room I always stayed in, the one I'd lived in after the accident. Most of the estate had been redecorated with flashy wallpaper and glass sculptures. But my old room still had the same pale green walls, the same white bookshelves, the same window seat overlooking Grandma's garden. I let my fingers run along the spine of the finance textbooks she'd given me in high school. Still there, still marked up in her loopy handwriting, right next to my old journal, where she made me track my first mock portfolio. I was halfway through unpacking when a soft knock came at the door. Serena, of all people, stood in the hallway. "Thought I heard you arrive," she said, stepping in. She wore designer jeans and a cashmere cardigan that cost more than my entire outfit, but she didn't have that smug look she usually did. Serena and I had never been close, but she was the least unbearable of the cousins. At least she said hello like a human being. "I wanted to give you a heads up," she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Uncle Charles is going full steam ahead. He's got mock-ups buyer interest, even developers flying in tomorrow. He's pushing hard for the mansion sale." I stared at her, my stomach sinking. "But this place, it's history. It's Grandma." She nodded. "I know, but Charles keeps talking about unlocking the value and modernizing the portfolio. He's already locked down most of the votes. Because Uncle Charles, in his infinite wisdom, had implemented a governance structure for Carter family assets. Every adult member had voting shares based on their contributions to the family trust. He, of course, held the most. My share, a whopping 2%. "This why the conference is 3 days, instead of the usual 2, I asked. Serena nodded. "Saturday is pitches and updates. Sunday's financial presentations. Monday, final vote. Then I guess I better get ready," I said quietly. She gave me a small smile. "I'll back you for what it's worth. But brace yourself." And with that, she left. I sat in the quiet for a moment longer, watching the breeze move through the rose garden. That night at dinner was exactly what I expected. The dining hall was lit like a wedding reception, crystal silver, and so much self-congratulation it was suffocating. Uncle Charles was holding court at the head of the table, just like he had every year since Grandma passed. His latest project, a condo complex in downtown LA, that sold out before the foundation was even poured. "Demand is outrageous," he said, swirling some ridiculously aged whiskey. Had to turn buyers away. Aunt Val launched into her latest gala numbers. She raised $600K for underserved opera audiences, whatever that meant. Max went on and on about his new yacht. Serena offered updates on her children's private Montessori school. And Logan, not missing a beat, turned his attention toward me. "So Nina," he said loud enough for half the table to hear, "still rockin' the Civic." I took a sip of water and smiled. "Still runs like a dream," Aunt Val tisked. "You know, dear, if you'd let Charles guide you through some investments, you could at least lease something a little more respectable." "I'm good with my current setup," I said. I could feel the smirks, the eye rolls. The way they talked about private chefs and ski chalets like those were just expected. But deep down, I was already planning the next morning. Saturday morning arrived bright and clear. I dressed carefully, black pants, a steel blue blouse, hair pulled back. Not flashy, not loud, just professional. The conference was being held in the drawing room, where Grandma used to read aloud to us when we were kids. Now her portraits were gone, replaced by digital displays showing mock-ups of glass towers with the Carter Holdings logo slapped across the top. Uncle Charles stood by the screen like a smug CEO on earnings day. "Ah, Nina," he said as I walked in, right on time. I slipped into a seat next to Serena. Several cousins exchanged glances. Charles launched into his pitch, moving through slides about brand identity, market trends, and strategic growth. It was part real estate seminar, part family manipulation. Then he got to the big one. The mansion. 5 acres, estimated value $40 million. "We've had some interest from developers already," Charles said. "Luxury residences. 14 units, rooftop lounge, green certified, of course." Aunt Val raised her hand. "Charles, before we get too far, should we consider that some of us might feel attached to the estate?" Then she turned and gave me a condescending little smile. "Nina, you lived here once. Surely you understand we can't let nostalgia cloud our judgment." Before I could answer, Damien jumped in. "Speaking of judgment, has anyone seen my new SL Roadster?" he said with a laugh. "It's parked out front. Matte gunmetal, imported." Everyone laughed. Charles nodded. "Exactly the kind of impression our family needs to maintain." The conversation moved on, talking ROI, capitalization rates, luxury aesthetics. I waited. When it got quiet, I raised my hand. "I think we need to at least talk about what Grandma would have wanted." Charles didn't flinch. "Lucille was a wonderful woman, but the market today is not what it was 30 years ago." Aunt Val added, "And with all due respect, Nina, you're not exactly experienced with high-value properties." I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. "I've done the math," I said. "This estate preserved has historical value that's only going to appreciate. Not everything has to be liquidated and leveled to be profitable." Brad chuckled. "Analysis from the girl who still rents her apartment." "Come on, Nina." The room laughed again. I sat in silence. But in my mind, I was already counting down to Monday. They had no idea who they were dealing with. Sunday morning started off sharp and cold, a breeze cutting through the vineyard behind the estate, like it had something to say. I stood by my window for a long moment, staring out at the garden, where Grandma used to sit every morning with her black coffee and a yellow notepad. I swear I could still see her there, pen-tapping, glasses low on her nose, planning her next big move. Today was the part of the conference I dreaded most: financial updates. It wasn't just the numbers, it was the showmanship, the puffed chests, the humblebrags dressed up as strategy. This was the day everyone competed to prove they were the most Carter of all the Carters. And me, I was the ghost in the room, until now. When I stepped into the drawing room, the energy had shifted. Gone were the flashy concept renderings from yesterday. In their place were leather-bound folders at every seat and a giant projection screen at the front of the room. Charles stood at the head of the long mahogany table, his navy suit so stiff it practically stood up on its own. "Good morning, everyone," he said. "Today we'll review updated net worth assessments and finalize voting rights based on declared holdings. I've also taken the liberty of proposing some streamlining to our family's governance model." My pulse quickened. Streamlining was Charles' speak for power grab. Grandma had put checks in place in her will, designed to make sure no one person could dominate decisions. Now, he was trying to undo all of that in the name of efficiency. His assistant began passing out spreadsheets, line items listing every family member's declared assets, their contribution scores, and their voting weight. I flipped to my page. Just as expected, 2%. A little inheritance here, some consultant income there. Just enough to look respectable. Just enough to fly under the radar. Uncle Charles, meanwhile, held 38%. The rest was scattered between his siblings and kids, all of whom made sure their lifestyles were as loud as their portfolios. "Let's begin," Charles said, sitting back like a CEO, about to enjoy his quarterly earnings parade. Damien kicked things off. "I've expanded my equity stake in 2 venture funds," he began, plus closed on a 3rd vacation property, this one in Jackson Hole. 5 bedrooms, infinity hot tub, mountain views. The table buzzed with impressed nods and a few golf claps. Felicity followed with her updates on luxury art investments and new boutique hotel partnerships in Aspen and Tulum. Even Serena, who I liked, went all in on the Flex new equity deals in her husband's media startup, a $200K renovation on their primary residence, and growing trust assets for the kids' international boarding school fund. Every time someone finished, Charles made a show of highlighting their numbers. Strong year, smart capital allocation, nice leverage. Then it was my turn. I stood up clutching the same leather folio I'd been quietly building for over a decade. My year was fairly standard. I began, my voice steady. Consulting income held steady. I maintained a lean portfolio structure focused on cash flow over appreciation. Charles didn't even look up. Damien smirked. "Still renting that tiny spot in East Bay?" I didn't answer. "Have you even bought property yet?" Felicity asked, as if she genuinely couldn't fathom someone who hadn't dropped 7 figures on a pied-à-terre. I gave a polite smile. "I've been focused on long-term positioning." "Well, maybe you just need to marry someone with better credit." Brad chimed in, laughing like he just dropped a punchline on open mic night. The table erupted in laughter. Even Aunt Val chuckled behind her wineglass. But what hurt wasn't the mockery. I was used to that. It was the assumption that, because I wasn't performing wealth the way they did, I must not have any. That I was poor, pitiful Nina, the orphan who got taken in, the girl who couldn't afford better. And now they wanted to create a family assistance fund for members who haven't been as fortunate. Charles looked right at me when he said it, didn't even blink. After lunch, I retreated to the back patio, staring at the old fountain that Grandma had restored herself. I could still hear her voice her words about what wealth was supposed to mean. Not power, not presentation, security, choice, freedom. Serena came to find me not long after. "They were brutal," she said, sitting beside me with 2 mugs of coffee. I nodded, still processing. "It's not even about the money. It's the way they assume. Like I couldn't possibly have made something of myself unless it was on their terms." Serena was quiet for a moment. "For what it's worth, I think they're going to regret underestimating you." I gave her a small smile. "They already do. They just don't know it yet." She looked puzzled for a second. Then she saw the folder still resting on my lap. "Nina, what is that?" I hesitated, then passed it to her. She opened it slowly, eyes scanning page after page of property deeds, ownership structures, and investment summaries. Her jaw dropped. You own Crescent Towers." Her voice was a whisper now. "That's where I live. That's where Logan lives." I nodded. "Bought it last year. Through a trust. With some guidance from Grandma's old attorney. Upgraded security, improved tenant policies, added value across the board." She blinked at me like I'd just said I was secretly royalty. "And all the other stuff they've been mocking you for, the apartment, the car." "Strategic camouflage," I said with a smile. I never needed their attention. I just needed time. Serena looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. "You're going to tell them tomorrow, aren't you?" I nodded. "It's time." She reached out and squeezed my hand. "You're about to burn their entire definition of wealth to the ground." That night after dinner, I sat at my old desk and called Mr. Carrington. They voted in favor of selling the estate, I told him. "It's going to the developers unless we block it." His voice was calm as ever. "And I take it you're ready to reveal." "Yes. But first I want to transfer all my holdings to a new entity, one that will allow me to purchase the estate before it's bulldozed." There was a pause on the other end. "What should we call this entity?" I glanced at Grandma's old notebook on the shelf. Still marked up. Still full of wisdom. "Lucille Trust," I said softly. "This house is coming home." Monday morning hit different. The fog over the vineyard had finally lifted, and the early sun poured through the estate windows like a spotlight. It felt like the universe was ready for a reveal, and so was I. I dressed deliberately, a charcoal gray suit, clean-cut and tailored. No labels visible, no flash, just sharp lines and quiet authority. Around my neck, I wore the only thing of Grandma's I'd ever kept for myself, her single-strand pearl necklace. I wasn't here to play their game anymore. I was here to change it. The family was already gathered in the conference room when I arrived. Laptops, open folders, spread out coffee, steaming in china cups that hadn't seen the light of day since Lucille's last Christmas brunch. Charles stood at the head of the room, ready to wrap things up. Today, we finalized 2 key items, he said briskly. First, the sale of this property. West Point developers have submitted a revised offer of 48 million contracts are ready for signing. Second, the apartment complex, where several of you reside, Crescent Towers. We've identified the ownership structure, and it appears to be held by a firm called Horizon Holdings. He tapped the folder in front of him. We believe they may be vulnerable to a little strategic pressure, he added, smirking, like he'd just outmaneuvered a stubborn broker. A few well-placed phone calls, and that building could be in family hands by the end of the quarter. I waited a beat, then stood up slowly. Before we move forward, I said clearly, I'd like to request a few minutes to present some information of my own. Charles looked annoyed. Nina, we've already heard from everyone. You haven't heard this. I didn't wait for his approval. I walked to the front of the room, opened my portfolio, and pulled out the 1-page valuation summary Mr. Carrington had prepared. For years, I began, I've listened as all of you speculated about my finances, mocked my choices, treated me like some sort of cautionary tale. But today, I'd like to offer a little clarity. I passed the summary to Charles's assistant. Would you please display this for everyone? The projector lit up, and there it was. My total net worth $73.2 million. A stunned silence fell over the room. Brad actually leaned forward to squint as if his eyes had betrayed him. That can't be right, Felicity said quietly. I smiled. It is. I began passing around detailed binders, copies of my financials, portfolio, breakdowns, and corporate holdings. 15 properties total. 3 commercial. 12 residential. All acquired through anonymous LLCs. All purchased through years of strategic reinvestment. The apartment building you were discussing, I own it. Serena gave a little gasp and looked around. I told you, she whispered to no one in particular. Charles's expression didn't change, but I could see his mind working double time. Calculating, backpedaling, trying to figure out how this had happened under his nose. You're saying, you've owned Crescent Towers this whole time? Max asked. I nodded. Yes. So when you complained about the guest registration policy, that was mine. And when you all joked about the lobby renovations, that was me too. Security upgrades after a break-in, common area improvements, value-added adjustments. I turned to Charles. And let me be clear, I have no intention of selling it to anyone. He opened his mouth, then closed it. Brad, as usual, recovered fastest. So what, you've got money now? Great. Doesn't change anything. You still don't have voting power. I smiled and took a deep breath. I do now. I handed out one final document, the one that mattered most. Meet the Lucille Trust. As of 9:00 this morning, I've transferred all of my holdings into this new entity. I've also used it to quietly acquire Carrington Partners, the firm that's been quietly purchasing Carter Holdings shares for years. I paused. Including the 30% that used to belong to Uncle Leo's branch of the family. They sold years ago. You just never looked into who bought it. Serena covered her mouth. Charles went pale. That gives me a combined 35% control of Carter Holdings. I continued calm and steady. Which means I now have the power to block any major family decisions, including the sale of this estate. Total silence. Dead air. Even Margot, who had peeked in with coffee, stood frozen at the door like she was witnessing history. Charles finally cleared his throat. I suppose we should revisit the vote then. Oh, we don't need another vote, I said smoothly. The sale is off, the mansion stays. And as for Crescent Towers, I looked around. Your leases will continue, but the family discounts, we'll be reviewing those. Brad muttered something under his breath. Jessica, who'd remained quiet through the entire exchange, suddenly clapped her hands once. Well, she said brightly, this just got interesting. Later that day, Charles invited me to lunch at his country club. First time he'd ever done that. He tried to spin the whole thing as a misunderstanding. "We were just worried about you," he said, swirling his drink. "Didn't realize you were building something so impressive." I let him talk. He pitched partnership ideas, a Carter Holdings expansion. He even suggested I lead the new philanthropic arm like he was offering me a toy to stay in line. I told him I'd think about it. What I didn't say was that I already had a plan. The estate, I wasn't just keeping it, I was transforming it. In the days that followed the reveal, everything changed. Not just in the official sense voting shares decision-making ownership, but in the quiet, subtle way that power shifts when perception finally catches up to reality. Suddenly, I wasn't just that cousin anymore. I was the woman who owned the building they lived in, the woman who bought back a third of the family business, the one who said nothing for 10 years, then walked into a boardroom and changed everything. Uncle Charles was the first to pivot. He invited me for lunch again. This time he was all charm and humility, asking questions like he actually cared what I thought. "I underestimated you," he said over a glass of Pinot. "Truthfully, I think we all did." I didn't respond. Because let's be honest, he didn't suddenly respect me. He respected the leverage. Aunt Val was next. She showed up at the estate with scones and a forced smile. "I think it's wonderful what you're doing," she said. So, grounded. The same woman who once told me I looked like a public librarian on a tight budget now wanted to talk about minimalist chic and intentional living. Even Brad came around eventually. If by coming around, you mean sending me an email with a subject line that read, "Joint venture opportunity." No greeting. No apology. Just an Excel attachment and a 5-paragraph pitch for a resort development in Big Sur. I didn't reply. Because here's the thing, I didn't build all this to gain their attention. I built it so I didn't need it. The first major project I launched as head of Lucille Trust was preserving the estate, but not just as a museum or mausoleum to Carter nostalgia. I converted it into the Lucille Center for Financial Empowerment, a nonprofit focused on financial literacy, housing education, and mentorship for women from working-class families. We host workshops, trainings, real estate boot camps. We partner with local schools. We fund scholarships. And yes, when the family visits for holidays or quarterly reviews, they now walk through a foyer lined not with oil portraits of themselves, but framed letters from women who bought their first homes, thanks to programs they once mocked. I still live in my same apartment in Oakland. I still drive my Honda. Not because I can't upgrade, but because I like not needing to. Serena asked me once over drinks, just the two of us, "Do you think they'll ever really see you even now?" I shrugged. "I think I finally stopped caring if they do." She nodded. "I wish I had your courage, but I don't think it's courage, really. It's clarity." 6 months after the conference, Margot found me in the Rose Garden, my favorite place on the property. She sat beside me, resting her hands in her lap the way Grandma used to. "I had a dream last night," she said quietly. "Miss Lucille was in it." I looked up. "Yeah?" She was standing right where you are now, wearing that old green coat. She looked at me and said, "Margot, tell Nina she got it right." Tears stung my eyes. "Thank you," I whispered. "She always said you were the only one who really understood." Look, I'm not going to pretend everything's perfect now. There are still family dinners where someone makes a passive-aggressive comment about my car. Still moments when Charles tries to slip a clause into a contract just to balance decision-making. Still cousins who only call when they need a favor. But now I have a choice, a voice, and boundaries. That's real wealth. Not just the millions on a spreadsheet, but the ability to shape your life on your own terms. So maybe you're watching this and thinking, "Okay, cool story, but what does this have to do with me?" Here's what I'll say. We live in a world that constantly tells us to prove ourselves, show off, shine bright, make noise. But sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is build quietly. Use the moments when no one's watching. Plant seeds, take notes, learn. Because when the time is right, you won't need to announce your worth. You'll show it. And the people who once ignored you, they'll scramble to catch up. If you're still here, thank you. Really. Drop a comment below if you've ever felt underestimated by your family or anyone. I'd love to hear your story. And if this video meant something to you, hit that like button and subscribe. I've got more coming, more about wealth, legacy, identity, and building a life that's real. Because you don't have to shout to be powerful. Sometimes the strongest move you can make is simply waiting for the right moment to reveal yourself.